2017 has been an exceptional year for video games, one that saw a new Game of the Year candidate emerge practically every single month. But even among such fierce competition, one title that really stands out is Studio MDHR's Cuphead, created by brothers Chad and Jared Moldenhauer. The game was originally announced as an Xbox PC exclusive as part of an indie game montage during Microsoft's 2014 E3 press conference, and despite being only on screen for a total of roughly 8 seconds, Cuphead managed to grab the attention of the gaming press with its old-school distinctive art style.
Wow.
Whoa.
Oh, have you not seen this game before?
No.
It looks fucking incredible.
It looks amazing.
And earlier this year, after 7 strenuous years in development, Cuphead released to both critical and commercial acclaim. And it's easy to see why. Cuphead is a joy to play, a frantic bullet hell nightmare that harkens back to old school 2D shooters like Contra and Gunstar Heroes, while also being crossed with a healthy dose of Street Fighter 3. It's a game that asks a lot of its players but delivers an equal amount in return. However, other more capable people have broken down the hows and whys of why this game is so much fun to play. So what I'd like to concentrate on today is the side of Cuphead that garnered it so much attention in the first place, its beautifully distinctive art style, and in particular, the period that inspired it. The centerpiece of Cuphead are the wild and varied boss battles that make up the majority of its playtime, each one pitting the player against a bizarre amalgamation of classical animation and video game tropes that warp and transform over the course of a battle. But each of the 19 bosses also draws a large amount of inspiration from specific classical cartoon characters, and if you look at the era the majority of these characters are from, you get the period of roughly 1928 to 1937, a 9-year span that comes right at the beginning of a larger era known as the Golden Age of animation. But to me, what's so exciting about the beginning of this period is that this is a time when animation as a medium hadn't really taken form yet. Disney had yet to produce their first feature film, and animation as a whole hadn't even been labelled a children's medium. The vast majority of cartoons being made were 6 to 8 minute theatrical shorts that would play before movies mostly aimed at adults. And you can see this in the subject matter of a lot of the cartoons of this era. Many of the shorts are set against the backdrop of Depression-era America of the 1930s. The Wall Street crash of October 24th, 1929 had left a large portion of the American workforce unemployed, with businesses closing at a rate of about 130 establishments a day. And you can see this grim reality reflected in the cartoons from this period, and in particular those of the Fleischer brothers, the co-owners of Inkwell Studios. A massive influence on Cuphead, and also the studio Inkwell Island is named after. The worlds conveyed in the Fleischer Brothers cartoons are often depicted as defunct, cracked portraits of America, populated by broken storefronts and streets in disrepair, starring characters who were often down on their luck unemployed everymen, regularly trapped in frightening and hostile environments, who themselves would sometimes even resort to stealing and acts of petty crime in order to feed themselves. Many cartoons of this period, and in particular those of the Fleischer Brothers, had strongly suggestive sexual themes in their work, especially those that featured Betty Boop, who not only wore an outfit that at the time at least must have been scandalous, but many of her cartoons show her enticing other characters or actively being lusted after, sometimes to the point that would not fly today. Death and mortality was also a common theme in cartoons of this era. There's one 8-minute short in particular called Swing for Your Sinners. It stars a Fleischer regular, Bimbo the dog, who tries to steal a chicken only to be caught by a police officer, chased into a graveyard where he is then trapped and tormented by a host of undead spirits, who taunt him with all the different ways they're going to kill him and drag his soul down to hell. And just look at this imagery, it's downright nightmarish. The short even ends with Bimbo plummeting through an endless black void where he's devoured by a gargantuan grinning skull. This particular short seems to have really struck a chord with Studio MDHR, as it's referenced in 3 of Cuphead's boss fights. Animations from this era are also occasionally incredibly racist, which isn't the most fun aspect of the period to dwell upon, but it shouldn't be forgotten either. As morbid as the themes of these animations could get, they were offset by these simple, playful character designs. What's so cool about designs from this period is that they generally adhere to two basic principles. One, they were very simple, and two, that simplicity was often accented by how surreal and unusual the designs and animations of these characters could be. For the most part, the simplicity was actually born from necessity. Animation was still a very new trade in the 1930s, and experienced animators were hard to come by, so making characters that were simple and easy to move was imperative. In fact, Walt Disney claims that by the simple act of giving Mickey Mouse 3 fingers rather than 4, it saved the company thousands of man-hours and tens of thousands of dollars. And this is the reason a lot of the designs from this period tend to be so simple. But I think that also gives it a really kind of cute charm. There's an appeal to these characters that feels innocent and unaffected by larger design trends. The surreal quality came from the fact that people were starting to realize that animation meant that things were now possible that never were in live action. Characters didn't just need to be human, they could now be dogs or cats or spiders or doors or gravestones. Anything could be anthropomorphized into a character, and characters could also be de-anthropomorphized into objects. Both the laws of physics and anatomy were treated with a reckless abandon for the sake of surreal visual comedy. And it's the combination of these elements that gives animation of this period such a distinctive identity. Morbid, dark themes expressed through simplistic characters that didn't need to adhere to the laws of reality, making for a unique form of escapism that I'm sure America at the time probably badly needed. And you can feel these same divergent themes in the design and story of Cuphead. This is a story about two brothers who lose their souls to the devil in a gambling spree and are forced to kill their fellow debtors and drag their souls back to hell in order to avoid the same fate. But it never feels that dark because of how damn joyous this game looks. Working off the same set of principles that made cartoons of the 1930s so distinctly memorable, with simple, minimalistic character designs accented by wild and imaginative animation, particularly in the transformation of the boss characters, as they grow extra limbs, morph into slot machines, or pilot giant mechanized cats, giving these characters that same innocent yet darkly surreal aesthetic as that of the 1930s. And I think what really helps bring these characters to life is the implementation of animation techniques that were pioneered from cartoons of this era. In the 1920s, animation was still very much seen as a novelty or a sideshow, and looking back on its simple, rudimentary movement styles, it's easy to see why. While the works of Winsor McCay were instrumental milestones in the development of animation, they weren't and aren't the most compelling pieces of entertainment. But in 1928, one person was about to change that, and that man was Walt Disney's best friend, Ub Iwerks. While Disney was a genius in business and a visionary in his own right, it was Ub's draftsmanship and talent that created the finalized designs for Mickey Mouse, as well as single-handedly animating the first 3 Mickey Mouse shorts, Playin' Crazy, The Gallopin' Gaucho, and Steamboat Willie. What so thoroughly separates Ub's work from the generation that came before him was something that would become fundamental to the entire process of animation. While early animators were obsessed with the illusion of movement, Ub was obsessed with the illusion of life, creating characters that didn't just move, but that looked and felt believable. And the techniques he'd used to do so were so fundamental that they'd eventually become the foundation for the 12 principles of animation outlined by Ollie Johnson in his 1982 book, The Illusion of Life. While we don't have time to deep dive into every one of them, let's take a look at the most basic, the principle of squash and stretch, and how Iwerks used it to transform the industry. If you've spent any time studying up on animation at all, you've most likely come across this principle. It's usually the first thing they teach in animation college. It's a technique that asks the artist to consider their drawings not as a 2-dimensional pencil rendering, but as a 3-dimensional volume of mass. and consider that mass susceptible to momentum, weight, and gravity as something that can be displaced and warped. Which might not sound important if you don't have much experience in animation, but if you look at slow motion footage of, say, a tennis ball being hit or a face being slapped, you'll see that mass is displaced a lot easier than we might ever consciously realize, but it's that displacement that registers with us on a subconscious level that makes objects feel real and susceptible to the laws of physics. And it's this principle that iWorks used to transform the flat, weightless animations of the 1920s into the fully formed, believable movements of the 30s. He was also the man credited with infusing animated characters with actual emotion and personality. Characters that could feel afraid or grow angry or fall in love. Emotions and traits that the audience could identify with and relate to, making these characters more believable and more empathetic than anything that had come before. It's principles like these that let audiences of the 30s forget that they were watching mere moving drawings, and made them believe that these were characters with actual weight and life. iWorks passed away in 1970, but I have to imagine that if he had seen the painstaking work Studio MDHR had put into reviving the style he had pioneered, it would have brought a smile to the old master's face. You can see the same dedication to solid three-dimensional drawings in the animation of Cuphead, utilising principles like squash and stretch to give a genuine sense of weight and physicality, while each character also has a tangible sense of personality and an emotional state that changes over the course of a battle. Like how the boss character Werner Werman starts the battle confident and foolhardy, but grows more frustrated and angry as the fight continues. And this is what I really love about Cuphead. It's not just a wink and a nod to a specific character or piece of media, but a deep and technical understanding of the specific techniques that made the animation of this period so great. What would draw this early period of animation's golden age to a close were two specific occurrences. The first being government regulation. Acts like the Hays Code and the Legion of Decency Production Code greatly limited the subject matter of what an animation could be, banning depictions of crime, sex, and violence, while in 1937, Disney released Snow White, and in doing so, transformed animation and the industry around it, effectively closing the book on the rubber hose period of animation. But I think it's so awesome that this style saw such a loving revival this year, and I wanted to use this video to celebrate the incredible feat that Studio MDHR has achieved, creating not just a great game, but a beautiful homage to such an unusual and important part of animation's history. Friends, thank you for joining me today. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did and would like to help support this channel, then you can do so over at patreon.com/supereyepatchwolf, where for as little as $1, you'll help create future videos like this and see your name listed with my glorious wolf pack right here. In particular, this week I'd like to thank Isaac Sinova, Nathan DeGrand, Justin Bicknell, Abrax_Khan, Neon Love, and Silverbard Games. I'll be back soon with another video, but in the meantime, come find me on the Let's Fight a Boss video game podcast or on Twitter @iPatchWolf. Friends, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.